Hey everybody, it's Helen Hillix, your host for From My Heart to Yours and my YouTube channel, Helen Hillix. And I have the great honor today of having Aaron McCormick with us, who is the author. He's an author, speaker, artist, all kinds of things. I'll tell you about that in just a moment. But we are here to talk about his book, Unbounded, Journey to Your Within. And I'm going to read you a little bit of a biography about him, and then we're going to dive into a lot of deep topics, including what's happening in our society right now with all the race protests and all the challenges, everything that we're facing. So Aaron McCormick, as I said, is an author, entrepreneur, inspirational speaker, and artist whose path to success and fulfillment defies societal norms and expectations in nearly every way. Raised by a single mom on the south side of Chicago, McCormick, since the age of 23, was one of the world's leading technology business transformation sales executives, earning millions and receiving numerous awards and distinctions. He's been honored as Best of IBM, an award bestowed upon the top 1% of 400,000 employees, founded several companies, and earned an MBA from a top business school with the rare precedent of having no prior undergraduate college degree. I've never heard of that before. McCormick courageously stood up to and escaped the fundamentalist religious cult in which he was raised, resulting in loss of his universe of friends and family. With the combination of deep empathy, wisdom, self-made success, McCormick ignites the innate ability we all have within to decode our own answers for maximum clarity and self-actualization. Aaron has helped countless people of all backgrounds realize greater fulfillment and success in areas of career, personal power, love and relationships, sales, entrepreneurship, and leadership. And he is here, as I said, to talk about Unbounded, Journey to Your Within. So welcome, Aaron. I'm so excited to have you here today, and I cannot wait to dive in and talk to you about all this powerful and intense feelings and thoughts and concepts. And I just can't wait to get your take on what's happening in the world right now.
Thank you, Helen. Thank you for having me. Look forward to the discussion.
So I'd like you to start, if you would, a little bit more of a deep dive about your childhood. And, you know, it's so miraculous, really. You talked about miraculous things happening to you, and then the dark side of that and how that they both have to be there. I would love to hear about your, what I consider miraculous overcoming of all those incredible odds. So tell us about your childhood and what happened.
Sure. And by the way, when I mention miraculous, I don't think anything is exclusive to me or anyone for that matter. I think we all are on a journey that is meant to defy the barriers that we have put ourselves into. And that's part of the beauty of the journey. And we have to face certain things before we see that sort of transformation or those miracles, if you will. And they're only miracles because it's what our physical mind has accepted to be normal or acceptable or not. But if we go into what we really are, which we won't fully know until we die, of course, but if all the intuition is true about what we are, there's no such thing as a miracle. We're all infinite and anything's possible anyway, but our human experience has taught us differently. So to go into your, I had to say that because I didn't want to send the impression that that I thought that I had some special miraculous journey. I really do believe that we all are in line for similar things that are miraculous to ourselves, right?
I love that you said that right away, because I completely agree. You know, being a therapist for 35 years, I've experienced personally and seen so many people make miraculous breakthroughs, and they look all kinds of different ways, don't they?
Yes.
So I love that because it instantly says to the audience, you know, you can do this too.
Yep. And the miracles are unique to you. Sometimes you can't explain them to others, and you may be concerned others will say, oh, that's in their mind. They're making that up. Our entire journey is in our own mind. We are alone in the sense that, and I don't mean that in a negative way, but we're coming to this world alone, meaning even if we have a twin that's born with us, our own experience of being birthed, and it's our own. And same with our death and all that stuff. So the miracles are personal, and sometimes they're universal for everyone to see, but usually they're just enough to change you into realizing that you're not exactly what you thought. You're not as limited as you thought. So Helen, to get to your question, you asked about my childhood. My childhood was in some ways not so eventful, in other ways unique. That's probably true for most of us. I'm the youngest of four, two older brothers and older sister. My parents divorced when I was about 3.5, maybe-ish years old. This was in Chicago. And then my mom moved to Houston, Texas. She wanted to get out of the cold. Moved all four of us to Houston. We were there for a couple years. Then we moved to Phoenix, Arizona, which is the other extreme, very dry heat, not humid heat, for a couple years. And then back to Houston for a couple years. This would make me 6 now, or let's see, from 3 and then 2. This would make me 9 or so. So we moved back to Chicago when I was around 9 or 10. And from 10 or 9 through 20, I was in Chicago. So I was, that shaped my character. When I say shape, I mean, the physical experience of the winters and the south side of Chicago, which is predominantly Black, but then there are suburbs that are very white. I grew up in an area from, I guess, 10 on, that was a really small community that actually was the neighborhood, the little small subdivision was exclusively white, and we were the only Black family. But the schools I went to, this was just one little, 50 or 80 house community. The schools I went to were very integrated and very mixed, including high school, probably split 50-50. So I got to see and hang with and have, gang friends, a very Black experience. And also I saw, white affluence and all the, a lot of people focusing on going to college. So it wasn't a bad school, wasn't an awesome school. It was a very diverse school, if you will. I was raised in a high control fundamentalist Christian religion. There's a lot of things I just said. High control fundamentalist Christian religion. So what does that mean? It just means, what describes a cult. And I usually don't get into exactly what it was. I'm not here to grind an axe. There are those who strongly believe in it, and that's their choice. That's their journey. There's not a cry of victimhood. I don't believe in victimhood. I think we all are experiencing what we came here to experience. But the facts of it are that the religion took the Bible very literally and was very forceful, is the right word maybe, in the things taught by Christ. Whether it be being no part of the world, if you will, or being Christian means following Christ, and Christ was, supposedly a perfect man, and therefore he could have been anything he wanted, yet he was a lowly carpenter. So this religion frowned upon college degrees. It frowned upon independent thinking, because the Bible talks a lot about Satan being independent. So therefore just kind of, follow, do, you're a good for nothing slave, just focus on God's kingdom, et cetera, et cetera. So I didn't get to play. I played Little League baseball. I never had birthdays in my entire life. Never had a Christmas, a Halloween. We had no celebrations like that. There was no plans for going to college. No facial hair was allowed. Obviously, things like tattoos were a no-no. 0 premarital sex. So I had no sex until I was like 20 and got married. And that was a rare thing because I have a strong libido. It runs in my family. Men usually do anyway, but I have probably more than average. I don't know. Because I tend to be centered and I don't have a lot of emotional issues, and that also helps you function in that department. And that's also a key reason why I might have gotten married very young at 20. Who knows why, but that was my first marriage. So the childhood was full of what you can't do. It was also my personal self also had a lot of introspection, and I've always been that way. So, as we go on, I'll explain to you how that introspection wove its way throughout all of my decisions and kind of brought me full circle from some things that was evident when I was even a toddler to where I am now. And I even talk about that in the book, and how what we are is not something that really changes. The human experience may change, but what we originally were and are, that is what it is. We just tend to deviate from it, and then we got to find ways of getting back to it to be complete.
You know, I want to follow up on a couple of things that you said, Aaron. You know, one is about the interestingly diverse experience in your living situation, in your high school situation. And I'm wondering if, from your perspective, if that diverse experience was a support in you being able to escape that poverty that you initially talked about in the biographical portion. If the exposure to the white neighborhood and the kids going to college and all of that expanded your perspective about life from an early age and allowed you to apply that natural introspective character to an expanded worldview.
Good question. So remember, the high school was very urban, very, meaning my grammar school children, elementary school friends who are now in high school, several of them were gangbangers. I mean, like, right. And I was cool with them all. And I knew all the handshakes. I just didn't go running and doing the same stuff. So I don't think that did, because I didn't go the route that people who have those options go anyway, such as right. College and so on. And several of my peers were very much stuck in the proverbial Black urban experience in terms of lack of options or selling drugs or doing other things like that. Then there were others that were studious and went on to great things. I mean, this is not it's not too dissimilar than reality, where you have multiple roads or pathways in front of you. The other thing I'll say about that is, what's always been intriguing to me is how, as evidence that the soul is what it is, regardless of the external stimuli around it. Some of us simply succumb more to whatever our external stimuli is than others, but the soul is what it is. So an example of that is where you have some children that are raised with affluence, along with a lot of love, tender affection, support, and the child still ends up being a delinquent, right? We've seen this of all races, usually white, because those are the ones that happen to have most often a lot of privilege in the first place, but it doesn't matter the race. Any race, you have all the above, such a great upbringing, such love, support, and this is the black sheep, so to speak, of the family, and they're criminal, they're low life, you wonder what, and then you have other situations where someone is a minority or white, but just in a very low social class, alcoholic parents that berate them and tell them they're going to be worth nothing and all this stuff, and the person becomes highly inspirational, successful, and so on and so forth. So again, the soul is here to do what it's here to do, and we all are incurring stimuli that we think makes or breaks us, but ultimately the soul is in control, and the rest is a physical outworking of what the soul allows to happen. So we allow ourselves to go through tons of poverty, or to be in what seems to be a terrible life path, to then come out of it later, or live an entire life of drama after drama until we go on to the next life. Who really knows? But yeah, I can't really say that. I can't definitively point to anything that physically made me what I am. And later on, I'll get into my illustration of babies and how we know that, we are what we are, regardless of this external stimuli that I refer to.
I love that. I read part of your book, and that part about observing the toddler in the airport. I do want to get to that, and how universal that dynamic is. But I wanted to ask you, before it slips my old mind, about, you said that you don't believe in victimhood, which I don't either, kind of in a philosophical way. But in terms of the impact, I'd like you to talk about your perspective about the terms of the impact of a white patriarchy on the Black culture at large? You know, is that how do you integrate the idea that there are no victims and that we each have a soul purpose and that external things don't make the difference, and the suppression of the Black society in our culture? How do you deal with those two apparent contradictions?
Yes. Well, first of all, external things absolutely make a difference in the physical experience. I'm talking about the soul. And when we fully get in touch with our soul, so to speak, which hence the journey to your within,
Mm-hmm.
the things that used to bind you from a physical perspective, whether it be race or any other thing for that matter, there's a way to become unbounded in the sense that the physical outworking of those limitations lose their effect on you, because we are energy before we are physical, and the things around us is dictating our energy. The ideals, the experiences, the physical treatment, all these different things dictate our energy, and because our energy becomes a certain thing, the experience becomes a certain thing. When all of us go through our personal journey, if you will, to connect with that original spark, we will eventually realize that everything served us actually, and it was a soul's level decision to experience all that we did. But excuse me. The other point that I'd make regarding that, what affects us and what doesn't. So when I talked about the child, for example, you know, when we're children, when we're toddlers, we seek joy, and we're all the same. So every baby of every race kind of is the same outside of their specific personality, which I'll touch on. But I mean, their mantra of, I want to be satisfied. I want to be in a place of joy. And if you put me in a place that's not, I'm pushing back, and I'm pushing back immediately. I grunt, I cry, get me out of this. So they're very much in touch with their feelings and what they're here to do. They want to be seen, they want to be recognized, but they don't want to be controlled, right? They actually want to experience freedom, but they don't realize they can get hurt in some ways. But their whole idea is, or their whole mantra is independence, joy. They're trying to live their purpose. When we get older, right, when we're elderly, we're kind of similar. We're less likely to be living for other ideals or trying to please other people. We've come to accept that we're the CEO of our lives, so to speak. We don't owe anybody anything, and nobody owes us, right? We typically don't have an overly woe is me attitude, and we're not easily suppressed in things that we feel or things that we want to do. It's somehow in the middle where we're not in those bookends of life at the beginning and toward the twilight years. In the middle, we're the most lost because we're the most influenced by everything around us, and trying to be what society has expected us to be, or you know what is easy to therefore follow, because we're also social creatures, and we tend to play off others. So we're kind of lost in the middle. So on the race topic, it's extremely real in this physical paradigm. But what I also understand is, I'll go macro, then I'll go into the immediacy of what's going on.
Okay.
I'm aware, Helen, that for far more of human history, Black, brown, whatever term you want to use, has been the leaders, the dominant race of the world, of humanity, for significantly longer than we've been the underside, so to speak. If it's been 400 years that some energy caused white man to enslave and do all these dastardly things, that's been 400 years, and the rest, the results have been systemic of that. And you don't undo 400 years in 40 or 50 years. That just doesn't add up. So obviously there's longer systemic things that still affect Black people. But what's interesting is that further back in history, for millennia, Egypt, Africa, you name it, I mean, that's the dominant race. Now, we don't have any evidence of terrible treatment of slavery, of other races for that matter, but we do know the richest human to ever live is Black ever in history. A lot of people don't Google that and know that. And we do know that, you know, like I said, Black has been a dominant race. Even that's irrelevant to me because I don't think humans should be dominating each other at all. That in and of itself is a detour from what we all really are anyway. But I've always just factored to myself, I've always just said, you know, I apparently chose to be here right now. Challenge is good. Everything, you know, pressure and work or challenges refine us. And if I were born a couple thousand years ago, I'd be the dominant race, and some white person would be wondering why they're playing second fiddle or whatever. So why am I going to overly lament the period of time I chose to be on this planet instead of recognizing or trying to understand how it serves me to be as I am at this moment in time? So that's the macro perspective that I'm aware of. And I think if more people understood that, they might whine a little bit less, because we've all come in different times. At least you're here in this modern era, as opposed to being in the dark ages where people were being, you know, parents eating children. I mean, there's so many weird things that have happened in human history as shown by archaeology. It's not even funny. So I'm still appreciative of where we are, and I'm appreciative and I'm clear on the bigger scheme of the human plight or the human journey on this planet.
Do you think, you know, you said earlier that from the time you were a child, you were introspective. And, you know, this is the part that I have a problem with myself in terms of, I mean, I was introspective as a child too, so it's not that I can't relate with that. But what if people aren't introspective and they are caught in these, you know, whether they're Black or, as you were saying, anybody else, you know, is caught in these circumstances of being sexually traumatized and living in the projects and you know, not being able to, you know, go through school and be successful. I mean, how can you support them with your philosophy to shift out of that paradigm of feeling so stuck in their circumstances that they can't get to the introspection?
You know, there are two initial sparks or causes that will help one connect to their higher self. Higher self, what's ironic is higher self is also the lower self in the sense that you're subconscious. So the things that are, the consciousness is what you've been taught. So there is the mind that is however many years you are old, 12 years old, 50 years old, 80 years old. And there's the subconscious, the spirit, the thing that you were the minute you came out, and therefore before you were even conceived. There's that essence or thing that you already were. And who knows how old that thing is? We won't know how this whole thing works until we die, and maybe it'll all get revealed at some point before that, especially the way the world is going, who knows? But so the two paths of connecting with your purpose or joy or getting out of the cycle of the physical experience, one is through it originates in the mind, and one originates in the heart. It's not as important where they originated, but it's good to understand yourself and understand how this is so. The heart origination is where it just happens. It just is. It's how you are. Just like you mentioned, I was introspective. What if people are not naturally that way? So the heart path is a spiritual path where it's unspoken energy, where despite your surroundings, despite how others are around you, despite your heredity, you happen to just be a certain way. And there's no logical reason for it. That's heart. That's spirit. That just is what it is. The other path is through the mind, where you conscientiously say to yourself, I don't like feeling this way. I don't want to be negative anymore. Or I want to understand a better path. And those are why people write or read books, quite frankly, right? That's when you consciously say, I want to take in information that starts to shape my subconscious or starts to shape how I view things so that I can get more fulfillment or have less internal conflict, less suffering, less victimhood, if you will. So if you have not naturally gone against the grain of things that don't serve you, meaning if you haven't led a life where if you, I shouldn't say led a life because that implicates some sort of physical accomplishment or something. There is no, we don't grade ourselves against others. We just have to understand what we are. If being in conflict inside, if you don't have a zero tolerance policy for that already, then you are probably naturally biased toward the mind. Meaning, you know, if you've gone through life suppressing things, or you're more likely to follow the peers. We've all done that to some degree at all ages. But if you find that you're into a career, if you don't love your job, for example, you hate it actually, and that's the most significant amount of time we ever spend doing anything is our job. Mm-hmm. There's evidence that you're there for the mind. The mind requires it. We got to make a living. There's fear of bills and everything else. The heart may hate it, but the mind has overpowered it. If you're in a relationship, if you tend to be in relationships that don't serve you, you know they're wrong, you hate what's happening, but you won't get out of it. That's the mind with fear of starting over, low self-esteem of finding a new person, being alone, the stigma. So therefore, I will suppress my heart, meaning my intuition that there's better for me. There's a better match. I don't have to be triggered all the time. It doesn't have to be this terrible. That's another example of suppression. If you have friendships, which a lot of us do, and there is a lot of conflict, or you're triggered in their presence, or it doesn't really serve your joy. Your joy seems to drop all the time, mm-hmm. but you won't get out of it. That's an example of the mind is in control more. You don't follow that, or your family expects you to be this career, that religion, this sexual orientation, this whatever it is, and you're completely different in the topic, but you don't want to rock the boat. There's the mind. So most of us tend to be very societally driven, extrinsically driven, and that's the majority. And then you have those that are anchored to spirit, and those happen to be the ones that will be different regardless, and they're not being different for different sake. They're actually living their truth, and usually they end up doing their purpose at a very young age because they have no choice but to do their purpose. It doesn't matter how ridiculous it may seem, and that's a different paradigm. And those are examples for us to live our truth. They're not examples for us to follow and do their life, right? Or worship, like all this crazy celebrityism out there. They're not examples like, oh, no, they're an example of how to find your gift, your purpose, and to do what that thing is. So, for somebody that has historically been caught up in the narratives around us, but deep inside, what's interesting, Helen, is I've created a video. I've put a video on Instagram like a couple days ago, and it's about this conflict actually to some degree. How most Blacks love being Black. What's interesting is that and they really do. They're not just saying. They love their culture. They talk about Black as beautiful. Now, of course, you have others that have been raised, that have come up feeling different, feeling inferior. There's a thread of that too. But the irony is that they love being Black. At the same time, they talk as if Black is the worst thing ever, right? It's the worst experience. Every shot's against us, and we can be killed in the streets at any moment, all these different things. And their soul is divided, right? They really are divided, and it's going to take some introspection for them to integrate that story inside of them of how it could be the worst position to be in, and yet deep down, you wouldn't change it. Like most Blacks, they would never say, I wish I could be white. The vast majority, trust me, do not actually wish that. And some white folks might be like, is that true? Like, really? I always thought it's horrible being Black. I thought no. And what's crazy about the world is we're full of this irony because the supposed racism against Blacks, and yet hip hop runs advertising and marketing and pop culture. Pop culture is Black soulful R&B type of thing all the way across the board. White people go for tans all the time. White people perm their hair to curl it. They do lip injections for bigger lips. They're trying their best to essentially be black without the experience. And then you have blacks that are like, oh no, I'm too dark. I don't want to be this dark. I wish I were lighter. Or, you know, there are periods where blacks were forsaking parts of them. Everybody is looking externally and devaluing themselves. And once you actually go within and become more intrinsic about it, you start appreciating everything else as they are, and you definitely appreciate yourself more as you are.
It's very interesting insights. What do you think about the protests that are going on in terms of this, again, this paradigm of, does that represent people really fighting for their heart's desire to be able to be expressed? Or is it the mental saying, I'm a victim and I have to break out of it? Or is it that duality again?
I think it's it's two components. One, racism is happening regularly, daily, just like all the other isms. Sexism is happening, nationalism, all these different things happen. Race is the biggest trigger. It's the most immediately visible thing. And it's got one of the darkest histories of all the other, discrimination out there. And it's insidious in that respect. So you have a combination of people experiencing random little things on the daily. So when the media props up and deliberately espouses a narrative as if it's exclusive to blacks, which is really, I think that's the biggest issue, is that all of us are being played, I believe, by the media and those that own the media to divide us and to create civil unrest, because there is so much happening to all races. That is not to say that certain individuals aren't more against black and more likely to be a jerk to a black person and violent. Mm-hmm. But at the end of the day, for a cop to murder someone is extremely rare. It's extremely exotic, if you will. Like it's a super rare event in the scheme of 40 million blacks or 330 million Americans. And and since our society thrives on negativity, but the press in particular wants to put out the most triggering story. There are tons of white families that have lost somebody through the brutality of a cop that never make national news. I mean, they're all over the place. And I know several names. I'm not going to go into everything, but I've seen this, and my heart goes out to those families, because they're probably sitting there getting more enraged, at the fact that the media will discount it. And the reason the media won't show it is because it will, for blacks to see that they're not the only ones, will cool their heads a little bit. It'll calm them down some. It doesn't mean injustice doesn't happen to them too, but it will calm them some. And they don't want calm. They want unrest. They want division. So they love to put up these particular narratives, and it's meant to divide. And so when I look at the effects of it, not only is it damaging black communities, and a lot of these people that are protesting aren't even black. Like, even when I see what's going on, you have people that are sincerely, honest-heartedly, of other races, empathetic to the issues, and they want to help. That's awesome. You have other groups that are professional agitators. Mm-hmm. They're here to create a scene. In fact, the mayor of Buffalo came out and admitted that the old man that was shoved to the ground and supposedly bled, hit his head, he wasn't a professional actor. This is Googleable. If you just Google mayor calls man agitator, but this is on none of the major media outlets. That is a bombshell of a thing to come out. How many other actors are there? We don't really know. I mean, most of the killings of a black person are real, I would think, but there's a lot of crazy so-called events that are created in election years that are manufactured for certain outcomes to take place. And we all know there's a handful of families that run central banking, own all the news outlets, so on and so forth. The world is not this utopia where everything is just, democratic and just. No, At every level of life, there are leaders that influence the behavior of the masses. The cool kids in school influence the behavior of the masses of kids after that. So all of us could be like schools of fish following these narratives that are literally propped up like a stage play, and they're tugging at our emotions, getting us sad, and we cry. Like, you might have cried for that old man. Like, what's society coming to when we're doing this to an elderly man? What's wrong with our cops? A lot of innocent people have been thinking that, only to find out the guy had radio scanners. He is a professional working for a multiple billion-dollar owner or employer that has instigated all sorts of drama throughout the world for long periods of time. And this is not me talking. This is the mayor. This is not, people try to call it, conspiracy, and that's how the masses try to dismiss waking up and kind of realizing what really makes the world tick is they call it conspiracy. So we all dismiss it. But I think this is some amazing stuff, and I think we're all being incited even more. So what I try to do, Helen, is I try to draw both blacks and whites and other races that are sincerely hurting to some information that makes them kind of aware that your feelings and your intellect is being trifled with. Everything is not exactly what you think it is, and there are reasons behind it. So be careful at what you let trigger you and move you to these huge degrees.
Are you of the mind, Aaron, that that if we could start from the consciousness of we're all one? I mean, that's kind of what it sounds like, that you're saying that, whether it's LGBTQ or Asian or Black or elderly or whatever, poverty, fat, whatever the prejudice is.
Everything, all the above, right?
Yeah. I mean, that if we would recognize that everybody is suffering and come together, then we could be healed, because we'd be out of our heads, and that would help us get back into our hearts and be able to then more easily flow into our individual passions that would then create that utopian society. I mean, is that a fair interpretation?
I mean, yes, I believe all those things are true. The challenge with that idea is it's expecting an idea to change your deepest feelings without the benefit of experience making it a fact, right? So to say we're all one, it's just like a lot of supposedly motivational books. They don't do much because they give you idealistic tips. They give you what to do next. They give you, and the mind, remember, so the mind is not as powerful as spirit. The mind is 20, 30, 50, 60, 80 years old. The spirit is infinite. The spirit is also what connects us all, because the spirit is energy and we are all energy. And when we are all actually serving each other, whether we realize it or not, remind me to come back to that. So what I think will help us become more loving to each other and accepting is to become that way to ourselves. We talk about self-love, but most people think of it in the very physical sense. Oh, love your blackness. Oh, love your overweight, or love your genetics. And they think it's like, oh, just do what you want to do no matter what anyone else says. Just self-love, self-love. That's not the real self-love. Real self-love, in the truest sense of love, besides the general, love of humanity, the term of loving someone, to love them, you have to know them, right? In terms of personal love. So before you can love yourself, you really got to know it. And if 90% of all of our thought is subconscious, that means 90% of what we do, we don't even know why we do it. We don't really know.
That is for sure.
Right? So we don't really know ourselves. We don't know what makes us tick. So we've yet to love and appreciate ourselves. And so the way to raise the collective consciousness is for everybody to believe in what they are in their journey. And the only way to do that is to consciously go through a process, kind of like how, a lot of people, most of us in retrospect, realize how something terrible helped us. in retrospect, because we're out of the energy of the pain, of the fear. So now you got a clear head and you can see how it's served. But when you're in the moment at 12 and you get your heart broken and it's the biggest thing in the world, and you get older and you realize that was nothing. Everything in hindsight is nothing. So if we go through a process of not just connecting the dots of past experiences, past failings, past successes, and viewing them through an observation lens and seeing the results on you, the challenges that they brought, and yet the triumphs that they also brought, or how they might have served, you will gradually begin to see how everything serves me anyway, including the bad. Yes, it sucks at the moment. I'm not immune to being scared of a problem or situation, or being emotionally triggered. I mean, if you didn't have that, you wouldn't be human. You'd already be up in space or someplace else.
Right.
But the more you are aware of these things, the level that it confines you or triggers and scares you and cripples you gets less and less. And by the time you're done really learning and appreciating yourself, all conflict goes away with others. Because my issue with somebody else stems from me feeling threatened. When I realize every terrible thing that's ever happened to me served me anyway, the threat doesn't concern me, because whatever happens will serve me anyway. I stopped being worried about someone being different than me, because I realized I'm supposed to be short, fat, dark, pale. I chose this journey, and only introspection and analysis will show you that you're exactly how you're supposed to be. And so therefore you're not jealous or threatened by someone that looks different. Like, if we all fully knew ourselves and what we are here for and why, and how we all ultimately subconsciously are serving each other anyway, there's less of an issue of being a victim, of just not liking something that's different, because you love them to be as they are supposed to be, because you are as you're supposed to be. So I think proper self-love and understanding of who we really were from the beginning, who we are now, without all the goading, instigating, and all the other physical stimuli, that creates an energy inside of us that then permeates out from there. And that's how we end up all connected as one. And if you, I don't know where you want to go next, but if you wanted me to expound on how we actually all serve each other, I'll go there. But I want to give you an opening for.
Well, I just had one quick question, and I know that you have to go really soon, so I know you won't be able to say much about this. But how does what you're saying connect to Maslow's hierarchy of needs? I mean, what about people who really don't have their basic needs met for stable housing and food and feeling cared for? Isn't it an incredibly difficult challenge to go into that place of self-awareness, which I'm 100% in support of what you're saying? The way to shift the collective consciousness has got to be with me having an inner revolution of my own. I am 100% with you on that.
I think there are two basic motivations and purposes for all of us being on this planet. It's only two, and everything else fits under these two. Point one is to have an experience. To have an experience that we want to have, we chose to have. And I'll get to the bad parts too. That's point one. Serve self, because you came here to experience something. Your soul's experiencing. The second thing is to serve, is to be aware of the connection. Because I think we're in this physical realm, we have the illusion of disconnectedness, the illusion of separateness.
Right.
And we've been given all these challenges, from made up stuff like national boundaries to physical differences in appearances and height and weight and sexual orientation. We've given all this illusion of difference, mm-hmm. which makes it extremely challenging to recognize we're one, as you mentioned earlier. And that's part of the game, if you will, or the challenge. So given that our two needs are serve self, have an experience, whatever that experience is, need two, help somebody, serve someone, connect, because we would not be such people, would not be such social creatures if we didn't have this strong need to impact and experience and give experiences to others. So those are the two basic needs. So what about those, and this is funny you asked this question, I'm an empath, very empathic. And since childhood, hate injustice, hate bullying. People have told me stories I don't even remember happening where I'm sticking up for, helping, coming to the aid of. I'm programmed that way. We all are, to greater and lesser degrees. Our external experiences might have managed those traits out, but we all naturally are serving each other. So I would ask myself, even I would cringe when I would hear any president talk about America being the greatest country, as if there's some innate thing that makes the humans better. And yet when I travel the world, I've literally traveled the world, from China to Europe, you name it. And I've never had this internal thread going through me of American. I mean, people may act that way when they hear an American accent or speaking on a tour bus. Oh, there's an American amongst us, when you're in Brazil or some random country that's borderline third world in certain cities or whatever. It's like a big deal. And I'm like, I cringe at this notion that any humans are better than others. They simply aren't. So how do I reconcile some that are born in third world countries? And people tend to implicate it's Black, it's Africa. There's far more in India. There's a higher volume in the mass populated countries and continents like Asia, for example, of starvation than even Africa for that matter. But either way, regardless of where they are, why does that human end up in a situation with zero human physical opportunities afforded them? Clean water, basic stuff.
Right.
Here we are over here. So remember when I said we came here for an experience, and it has helped me immensely as I've connected my own dots and the dots of others, as I've observed how things have played out in other people's lives and stories and my own intuition, and that we subconsciously, our higher self chose the incarnation that we are experiencing.
Even if it's a guy of starvation, then that's the experience you had this lifetime around, and then you go on.
Because the soul continues. Even Morgan Freeman had a very popular show about God and about energy and spirit, and where does life really end? Does the body get lighter when that soul leaves? How can we ever quantify something we can't touch? Well, there's so much that implicates that we are these infinite spirits, or spirit, parceled off into 8 billion or whatever, how many, but we still are connected, having a physical journey. So it's not that there's no empathy for people starving or suffering. My heart still aches because it's an experience, and it's a physical pain, suffering that's happening in this life. And they don't know that it's all good. I'm really this heavenly God or whatever. You don't know that when you're here, but it all gets righted when it goes its full circle. But in any case, we're here to have an experience, serve ourselves, experience conquest, experience pain, experience all these different things. That's one reason, whatever I'm here to experience. Reason two, serve in some other capacity. If we happen to be born in a situation where you don't get either of those, you have a horrible experience, bullets are flying, third world country, starvation, you don't get to experience your best life or contribute to others, well, that may be one of a billion life experiences that you have. Maybe the next life you're a lizard, a dog. I'm not saying all this is absolute. None of us really know. We can't quantify the soul or the soul's journey, but those are things that seem plausible to me, given how our lives have gone.
I can definitely resonate with that, and I know you need to go, so I want to just say one more thing that, to me, this kind of comes back to the theme of your work is really ultimate personal accountability for the experience that you have. Is that, if you can wrap your mind around, I chose this.
Yes, and it's not so much because that can be painful to some. What do you mean I chose to be abused since I was 3 years old, or I chose to experience the death of my son, or the horrible things, and sometimes that can be triggering. The question is, what am I trying to learn in manifesting or having this particular experience? What am I here to learn? And when we go back through what we've been through, and a lot, like I talked about earlier about, the beauty of retrospection. So looking back is you're out of the emotion of it. Yeah. I give a great tool or way to think about this in the book. We don't have time to go into it now, but it makes it really clear of how much emotion taints our ability to understand the full picture. And there's a way to extract emotion from the most intense situations, and therefore get in a place where your vibe is higher because you see it totally differently. And then once the vibe is different, your brain can function better, because they say fear is crippling. So if you're trying to solve a problem in the energy of fear and anger and victimhood, you won't be able to come up with anything that serves you. But how do you get out of that energy so that the brain can do what it does, and so that you can actually solve some of your personal challenges, whether it's money or relationships or whatever it is? There's a way to get your energy in the right place so that you can then, manifest results that you want.
I really appreciate that, and I cannot wait to read more about that tool. And I'm very much in alignment with what you're saying, that reactivity, emotional reactivity, completely paralyzes us from the ability to use our intuitive wisdom. So tell us a little bit, how can people contact you? How can they buy your book? And any upcoming events you've got going, even in the pandemic? I don't know if there are any, but.
Right. We've all been sort of crippled. By the way, I believe the pandemic will serve a greater good. Just like darkness creates light. What follows the darkest moments are light. And by us getting out of the habits and the things that kept us distracted from our inner selves, you couldn't shop during the pandemic. You were not looking at brand new movies coming out during the pandemic. You were not taking vacations during the pandemic. And so you start to find other ways to find joy that don't include all these things that require, whether it be money or, malls and shopping and other people.
All the distractions.
Even other people, because constant social with others stops you from going within as well. So to a degree, it is going to ultimately vibe us up, because we'll go back to jobs and say, well, I stayed at this job because I was afraid of being without money or having bad credit, etc. Well, that's already happened and I'm alive. Or once you've faced your worst fears, you're no longer scared of it. So now you might say, let me actually do what brings me joy. I don't mind starting at the bottom, because hell, I've been through hell. I've been on the bottom already. So that's one of the many ways, and I give several others, of how darkness actually serves us. Okay, to your question, I can be found on AaronMcCormick.com. So AARON, McCormick, like the spices, McCormick.com, or even easier, Unboundedbook.com. On Instagram, it's the Aaron McCormick, and Facebook is also Facebook.com/the Aaron McCormick. The book is on Amazon, it's on Barnes & Noble. You can find it on my website, and it'll take you there to buy.
Okay, well, Aaron, I can't thank you enough for being with us today. It was fascinating hearing the macro and the micro and how it all works together. And I really appreciate your perspective, and I wish you all the best luck. And I'm going to be following you and hearing all your wisdom for the future too. So thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you for having me, and I appreciate the work you do to help as well. I always, whenever I talk to folks like you, I feel like I'm talking to soul family. You're giving yourself to try to help others be the better, happier versions that they can be. So that's awesome.
Thank you.